This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I'm rested and relaxed. And
Yeah.
we had a little beach vacay.
We did.
It was nice. It was very nice. I got sunburned in weird places as usual,
Okay.
but it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't get fried.
Yeah. I didn't. Last year I got burnt to a crisp. That really wasn't the case this year.
Yeah.
I was proud of myself for reapplying sunscreen. Wear sunscreen, people.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons.
For a lot of reasons,
Mostly
wear
so
sunscreen.
you can sleep at night.
Yeah. Yeah. You're in summer now.
It is summer. We have moved our podcast recording up to the office.
Yeah, we kind of keep switching back and forth. We don't have a home.
No. The couch is nice in theory.
The couch is nice in theory. The animals seem much happier. That is always our biggest hurdle when recording the pod.
Truly.
The-
Who's pleased?
The basement,
Not us.
the floor is loud, so when they walk on it, we have to stop. And then the cat is always just like, "Hello, good morning, I'm
up?
here.
Guess
I'm
what I
going
have?"
to purr into the microphone loudly."
Or
So
chew on the cord.
She has a bed in here, and she's
she-
quietly napping.
She doesn't know we're podcasting.
Yeah, as
And
soon
the
as she
dog is
figures it out,
none the
she'll come
wiser.
over and start whacking the mics. So
She will. It is summer. We're recording in the middle of the day. Feels
Yeah.
very weird.
yeah, I put it off. I wanted to put it off. Kate was ready to go last night, and I was like, you know what, my brain just isn't working. Let's do it.
I just mean
tomorrow.
normally it's like 6 p.m. when we start, so it's kind
It's
of
true.
weird
We
to be
usually
doing
do.
it.
Now we're in the middle of the day because Kate's not at school, and we have that leisure. I'm drinking coffee.
I started drinking coffee and now I'm just yawning and it's not working.
It's gotta kick in. You gotta give it
I know,
time.
it's been like an hour. All right, fine.
It'll get there. Then it'll come crashing. The world will come crashing down around you suddenly.
My chest gets tight.
Because Kate had
Gotta
cold
go.
brew. Kate had cold brew. Kate drinks cold brew, which is like the gut punchiest of coffee.
Yeah,
And
I love it.
it's really good.
Makes
I'll
me
enjoy it
very
too, but
ill.
I can only drink probably like half a cup of it and before I become unhinged.
Okay, but by the time you put, like, my whole thing was ice. You know what I mean? Like, that really does take up quite a bit of that
yeah,
container.
yeah.
So it's probably still like a cup.
You're just more brave than I. That's all.
I just love how it tastes.
Yeah.
I want like the sweetest, most unhealthiest coffee when I want coffee.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of found a medium because what I really want is RAF coffee, but I can't
RAF
possibly do
coffee.
that and not be on insulin in 5 years.
Yeah, RAF
So-
coffee is this. It predated my discovery of it, but I discovered it when I went to New York with my dad for like a conference once. We went to this Russian kind of restaurant, and
Didn't we go there?
Oh yeah, I forgot.
We went there.
Yeah,
It
so
was really
you
good.
and I went there because I was
They had
like,
great
we have to
wine.
go try this coffee because it
Remember
was
their
so
wine
good.
selection?
They had a great wine
So
selection,
good.
but they had this thing called RAF coffee on the menu, and it's basically just a gallon of heavy cream and a pound of sugar.
And a little
And
bit of coffee.
then some coffee,
So good.
but you hot froth it all together, and it's so good. It's so good. Mm-hmm. There's some vanilla
I
flavoring
can go for one of
in the
those right
version
now.
that I make.
There is
too.
a vanilla, yeah.
Anyway, it's really good, but
saw you
not.
on again,
It's not a
thinking
very
about it.
summery kind of drink. Yeah, what's up with you and the coffee?
I'm like
yawns?
fine. I'm really confused. I had kind of successfully quit caffeine for a while.
Yeah.
And now I just like dabble back and forth. Mm-hmm. And like 2 days ago, I took a 2-hour nap, which was glorious. And yesterday I was like, no nap. But then we were up to like 2 a.m. And so maybe that's why. I only got like 6 hours of sleep.
We are
last
on a
night.
weird sleeping schedule because it's like you don't have to wake up, and now we're just
No.
like everything is awesome all the
And-
time. Let's stay up till 3.
As like every teacher who's listening knows, like summer is just a million appointments because you get
You gotta
as many
Catch up on
appointments
all your
in.
healthcare.
Yeah, because that's finally time to do that.
This is when I take care of
Yeah,
myself.
so,
That
I,
is
like-
when I slowly erode at my desk.
I had like my dentist appointment. I had my chiro today. Like I'm like in that state of things, and so it's like
We also just stayed up till 3, like playing a game. Takes Two,
yeah,
which is really cool. We
It
discovered
is. It's so
really
cute.
hilarious, really cute, just absolutely delightful, cozy.
we were laughing so
Co-op.
hard.
Yeah.
that I like for a moment, like we're not even that close to our neighbor's house, but I was like, if they're near that wall, they could probably hear me screaming.
Yeah,
because we were
it's
like
so funny.
truly losing it.
So it's a cooperative game. We played another one by the same publisher. That
Oh,
was
is that the
loosely based
same?
on Shawshank Redemption. Yeah.
Oh, it does feel that way
Yeah.
when it does the
So
scenes. Yeah.
it's a cooperative. It's a 2-player cooperative game, and you can only play the game if you cooperate. And it's a really cool concept. And this particular game is just like, it's very cute and it's very funny.
So funny.
Yeah.
When you die, you just explode into a million pieces.
Yeah.
And then you just reappear. It's
You're kind
so
of in
great.
like a dream state. You play as like little toys that this girl has made, and it's just, I don't want to give too much away, but it's extremely cute. If you've got a buddy and some time,
And it's
play
cool
this
because you only have
co-op
to buy
game
it
together.
once.
Yeah.
Like, it's made so that only
one person buys it, and then the other person can play it with a friend.
And it's on
pass.
sale right now.
It's on sale, yes,
Yeah.
on the Steam
so
store.
go buy that on Steam.
Yeah, go buy
But
that.
that game and just some other stuff we've been doing have been like so good. It just feels like very good.
Feels good to relax and turn off your brain.
Well, I went to the dentist yesterday and they like complimented my blood pressure. Do you know how long it's been since my blood pressure has been complimented? Probably pre-pandemic to start with.
Yeah, for real,
and it was probably
for
the
real.
summer before that pandemic. So we're
Well,
going
it's kind
way
of
back.
interesting because I've also been being very productive since we got back from vacation. I've just like kind of buckled down and gotten a lot of work
Yeah.
done, and I'm feeling rejuvenated and rested. And I
feeling,
also like that we can hang out and play games till 3. So.
Me too. Well, and just like with my blood pressure, I was like, you just sit there and wait because the cuff's doing its thing, and you're like, what's it gonna say?
What's it
this
gonna be?
time? And they were like, congrats, it's awesome. And I was like, I'm about to flatline, or is this a joke, or what?
No, for
So
real.
it turns out
you're healthy.
when you're not a teacher
Congratulations.
in
Yeah.
person during a pandemic, your blood pressure kind of finally goes back to where it's supposed to be. So that was a great feeling.
Funny how that works.
I was like, oh, thank God.
Well, good.
Anyways.
I'm glad. I'm happy for you.
That was like a big win for me.
Yeah,
So
truly.
That was good news.
Okay, cool.
So
Well,
this week,
yeah, are we ready
this
to dive
episode-
in? Are we diving in? Are we ready to go?
yeah, I'm still thinking about imposter syndrome.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
I keep reading about it.
Yeah.
Now that we did all that searching, my
I think
Twitter
my
is
Googling
like,
now it's
Yeah.
inundating me that the targeted ads
Yeah.
to fix my imposter syndrome are coming at me fast and
yeah.
furious.
I did like that one. But this week, I really like what you chose, but I had a very hard time kind of doing my end of the research. I sat here for like 3 hours.
I didn't want to do the
yesterday.
group work.
I didn't want to do my group work.
Yeah.
No, I did, but I kept getting off on like,
Tangents?
yeah.
There's a
And
lot
I
of
was like,
tangents.
oh, this is interesting.
We're talking about the physical design of school buildings and campuses and kind of how that relates to learning, sort of, kind of. And yeah.
What
so
is
like,
the impact of it?
yeah, just like what the actual physical place, kind of how those places have evolved over time and what it means for learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Chelsea and I are kind of coming from an interesting perspective on this. One, because we both attended schools. Our elementary schools are both well over 100 years old now. So we have that experience. We both went to smaller public schools where we had multiple schools that you attended. So you did like what, K through 3? How were
K
your
through
schools?
4 was my elementary school.
Okay, mine was K4, and then we had a 5 building, and then
Yeah.
we had 6 through 8, and then 9 through 12.
I had, at the time, it was just K4, 5, 8, and then it split off. Because
9,
they
12.
built a new school
Gotcha.
building, middle school.
So we're kind of coming from that perspective, but also we live in a district that's going through some pretty ugly processes of trying to build.
Yeah.
new-
Oh, yeah. Currently, we do live in a district that's trying to have a levy to build a new school building.
Because the school that they're in is well over 100 and some years.
Yeah, the elementary school is old, and
yeah.
some people don't like it, and some people do like it. And the small town America, school levies are a whole thing in and
It's
of themselves. I think we're gonna actually do an episode on that at some point. Like kind of how you fund, especially
Yeah.
like smaller local public school. It's just a really interesting kind of landscape.
It's not
of
easy
funding.
stuff.
No, it's not easy, and when you know everybody, when everybody in a small town knows everybody else, when something like a school levy fails, it's like
Personal.
hot drama.
Well,
So,
also,
yeah.
the other reason that this is such an interesting topic is that so much of the factors that we are talking about and what makes a school productive, right, and like a good learning place are the same things we were discussing and how to return to school during a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So like these older schools especially had a much harder time than these new builds, kind of making it a safer place to return to school just because their age is so against them.
Yeah. We were
So-
just talking about this when I was doing my research. I really did not realize how much air quality, like internal air quality of buildings was a deciding factor of their architecture for, it has a lot to do with how buildings are designed and laid out and such. So
All right.
anyway, cool. You want
Are
to
you
jump
ready?
right in?
It starts with you, as always.
Well, I like to go in the Wayback Machine.
Did you see my note?
Yeah, your note is Chelsea will want to start with the history of the thing, so here's a brief history that she will surely develop to include some Greek/Roman stuff because she loves it so much. I did. I put in some Greek and Roman stuff just for you. Just for you.
You were going to, even if I didn't.
I'm not sure if I was planning to go back that far, but probably it's worthwhile. But I did, so I did go back that
I'm
far.
just going to copy and paste it into all of our show notes from here until the end.
Just this history note.
Yeah, it's just going to start.
Everything goes
segment.
back to ancient Greece and Rome. And everything that
I
we
can
do.
safely start in like the 1700s for most of my research because she won't get that recent, so we're good.
Yeah, I like to live in the olden times. The olden times.
All right, take us away.
Well, okay, so I started with the Lyceum, the concept of school in ancient Greece. And in Athens in particular, I'm just going to pick on this example. There's the Lyceum, which was kind of like slightly outside of town in this very shady olive grove, as far as people can tell. There's like a lot of ongoing,
nice.
Yeah, there's a lot of ongoing excavation at the site, what they think is the site of the Lyceum in Athens. So,
Really?
Yeah. So this,
Have you been there?
I've been to Athens. I'm not sure that we were at any point that might have been considered the Lyceum. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure where that is in the relationship to the rest of the city. But so this building, like I said, we don't exactly know how it is. It is like, there's several buildings that form the Lyceum, but any kind of main architecture would have, the Lyceum itself would have been used to, at some point, house Athenian assembly meetings. So, a big enough space where a whole bunch of landed men could get together and talk about the politics of the time. So it had to have been, at least big enough to kind of hold those sorts of gatherings.
A larger group.
Yeah.
Of guys, I mean.
And there also used to be like military practices at the Lyceum. So it's basically, it's like a place for physical exercising and philosophical discussion at the time, and learning of music.
It's a YMCA.
And yeah, it's a YMCA basically. So yeah.
You're welcome.
Yes, the Lyceum is the YMCA of the ancient Greek world. I'm not gonna go too in depth about
They
this
would be
old
so
stuff.
mad.
If you call them the YMCA.
It's so much better. Anyways.
I mean, YMCA actually is conceptually not that far away from the Lyceum, I would say. It's probably closer than our modern school
I would agree with that.
day, the YMCA, because the whole thing about physical activity is like being core to the educational experience of the ancient Greek youth. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Going to move on to Rome, the Roman Empire.
I knew it.
So Rome, unlike Greece, I think, at least in the early days of the Roman Empire, there was a big emphasis on the nuclear family unit and the father as the head of a household, and that concept trickled out into how they did their education. So there was an awful lot of private tutoring and family tutoring, and for a long time there weren't kind of investments in what we might think of as school buildings and infrastructure, because it wasn't a priority, because that's not how their culture worked. And eventually, if there were school buildings, they weren't standalone. They were kind of attached to shops or something like that. Yeah, lots of private tutoring in Rome. Eventually, we would start to invest. They kind of picked up on influences from the Greeks and started to invest a little more in the idea of a take on public education.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, public education, but it wasn't for everyone. It was for, wealthy men.
Yeah.
Wealthy young men.
Well, we did that in America too. So
yeah, everybody seems to have gotten on board the wealthy young men.
that must have been in the pamphlet somewhere.
Get the education train. Yeah. So then I skipped ahead a bunch. I was like, okay, let's just go to medieval. I mean, again, this is a very Western-centric view of things, but it's just like how we inherited the things that we have here. So this is not to say that there weren't a lot of interesting takes on school buildings everywhere in the world that do not have a sort of basically what I'm saying is white people do not have the corner of the market on what education should look like, but it's just kind of like
Even though it
what
seems
we
like
we're just talking about how we got what we inherited.
It's almost like
basically.
history is whitewashed.
It's almost like that. Be that as it may, this is how we got where we are. So I jumped to medieval kind of England, and then a sort of Oxbridge kind of conversation. Earliest schools in England were monastic, and there were parish houses and things like that. We see over and over again, there's a huge tie between religion and education for much of the Western world anyway. There were privately endowed schools like Eton. We've talked about Eton. So there were those kinds of things. And then we get the Oxford and Cambridge. So Oxford. Sorry, I keep saying Oxbridge to shorten, but Oxford, the university as we know it, probably began, I think, somewhere around the 12th century is what I found. And it was just like gatherings of students around popular teachers. So they just kind of like, oh, here's a teacher, everybody, let's go here. So the schools weren't about building so much as they were about people. And then the buildings kind of came later. There's like slap a building on it as a recognition of education that was already happening in the world, basically. So this note that I found from this one article was claiming that Oxford wasn't really founded. It just kind of grew. And then Cambridge was actually founded by students fleeing from Oxford after there was violence between the university and the town of Oxford. And I honestly did not go a deep dive into why that was happening, but I have a note to myself that I want to go learn more about that. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd like to do a whole episode on Oxbridge, but
Let's do it.
Yeah, it'd be.
I think
cool.
that would be fun, actually.
Yeah. Okay, so then we are skipping way ahead to where we are now. America. Would you like to take over?
Yeah.
Take the reins?
So a lot of what you just said about those schools are going to be exactly the same kind of case for America, as far as like male driven and very like religious and things like that. Like we're gonna see the same type of thing. So 1-room schoolhouses. So to be fair, lots of countries had 1-room schoolhouses. It wasn't just us, even though we like to believe we are very special. And so for most of the US, we saw these schoolhouses being used during the 1700s and like early mid 1800s. They still exist, actually, even still today. But like a lot of other things we covered, for example, the libraries, the foundation of 1-room schoolhouses was often tied to religion. And so some communities even went as far as to go and use the same building for both.
Oh, for church and for school.
Yeah. So
interesting.
Can I tell you some interesting facts about America's 1-room schoolhouses?
Yes, I would love to know some interesting facts
Okay.
about America's 1-room schoolhouses.
Thank you. Okay. You know who I forgot to mention through all of this that we totally should have included? How do we not include Maria Montessori in this? Because her open idea classrooms is like exactly what we're going back to as we start to build. Anyways, okay. We can throw her in later.
Sure.
So, important facts about 1-room schoolhouses in the United States. Teachers are very young normally, and they don't have a lot of experience or any sort of education in teaching. And so that's one of the things that drives, who we'll talk about in a bit, Horace Mann, to start establishing sort of these criteria that he believes that teachers should have. So for the 1-room schoolhouses, if it was a male teacher there, that him and his wife would normally be given a home. Sometimes he was even attached to the back of the school. If a woman was hired, she was normally placed to live with a local family. This reminds me of, what's the house called that the church gives to the...
Like a parish house.
Yeah, it's like
basically.
Yeah, there's another word I was thinking of, but yeah, that's the same thing.
A manse or something?
Yeah, you know what I mean, though. Basically, if it was a family that was coming in to teach, they would provide a place for them to live. But if it was just a single woman, which was normally the case, she would just be forced to like live with some family who had room for her.
Oh, it's just a lady? She doesn't need privacy? She doesn't exist except to please us?
Most of these teachers were female, and they spent a lot of time caring for the students. And what I kept reading was that, so for like in the winter, let's say, because they just went year round, she would have to get there like super early, start the fire, warm the whole classroom.
Start the fire.
And then she would also make them like hot lunch and stuff. Like it was truly like very motherly what she was doing. So sometimes they built schools in the middle of the roads because they didn't want to give up good farming land, which I think is very funny. Yep. Normally you would attend class 6 months a year, but you could come and go as you please. And so women would normally attend in the summer and men in the winter. And it's mostly just because of their chores. Men had more work to do around the farm in the summer, and so winter was for school. Students in these schools could be anywhere from 4 to 20, and the youngest sat in the front, and they worked their way back to being the oldest.
Yeah, so this is a kind of a weird quirk of... I mean... It's like a chicken and egg scenario about the architecture of the building, but the building is really just a big open room.
It's literally just benches.
Right.
There
and
aren't desks.
all of your age groups are learning together in the same building. Yeah. So you get a lot of scenarios of older students helping younger ones to learn and stuff like that. Yeah. But it's kind of almost a product of the physical space, the way it is laid out. You have no other option but to be just sort of co-educated alongside your much older peers.
Yeah. So the books in these schools were donated by local churches or religious leaders or the wealthy folks who were around to give. And so the learning that happened here was almost completely memorization. It wasn't just, I mean, it's nothing like what we would, see today, obviously. But this is part of how
I just think of kids doing lines. Like,
yeah.
they have little chalkboards. They're just
right. And
writing
so,
stuff over and over and over again.
yeah. But this is also part of what helped form these really, really small communities, was that they all went to this very small school. They all learned the exact same thing. There was no outside, you know what I mean? Like, the perspectives were all right there. And so it's just really repetitive learning that happened. So that's how we see so much of the political and religious aspects come in, is that they've all just been forced to learn this exact same thing over and over and over again. So as of a couple years ago, there were still hundreds of one-room schoolhouses in operation all around the U.S.
That I did not know. I didn't expect.
It was like 2 or 3 years ago, and they were all over. You were guessing just the South, but they were actually everywhere.
Well, I was guessing more of them would still exist in the South, but
the South was actually like one of the last places to really grow into one-room schoolhouses, because it was such a New England-based thing when it started. Because we're talking like the colonies literally doing this, so it had to spread that way. And just another fun fact before I wrap up this section is that right now we're less than 5 miles away from a former one-room schoolhouse.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are everywhere, and you can kind of notice them. They often have like
they're pretty
white
distinct.
siding now.
They're usually like brick. They have like some kind of white siding somewhere, or
they just look like a big room and kind of like I don't know, it's not A-frame, but it's just like that shape roof.
yeah,
You know what I'm talking
it's
about?
just
Like,
very,
it's
very
just-
simple.
It's very simple architecture. It's basically just a big box with a roof slapped on top.
Yep, it's got a
There's
lid.
big front door in the middle of it. And you'd walk in, and you just usually walk in from the back, and there'd be chalkboards at the front, and that's how it
If
works.
they had those,
Yeah.
So as far as learning that happened in a one-room schoolhouse, not a lot, I would venture to say.
You're very anti one-room schoolhouse.
No,
learning
I
though.
just, part of the thing, and this one will come up later as well, is like we're still dealing with very high numbers of illiterate people. You know what I mean? Like, it's just
I think
not,
that's. I was going to say that it seems like it's a product of the time. The whole goal was basically to make people literate.
yeah.
So if that's your real goal for education, stuff like writing lines and memorizing stuff is not a bad way to approach that
Well,
problem. But
And one of the other things that I was reading about was basically that the goal of a one-room schoolhouse was to teach people how to read the Bible. Like, that's the goal, right? Is like to make good religious leaders or whatever folks. So as far as it being conducive to learning, I would say it's not. Probably anytime you have a fireplace in your classroom, it's going to be somewhat distracting and a little
I like
bit
that idea.
dangerous.
I like the idea of having a fireplace in the
Your
class.
teacher having to fix a stew in the middle of the day seems to take away from what she should probably be doing,
I mean, it's not that much
No.
different from public schools serving lunch. you
No,
know?
it's not. But
Same
it's
concept.
just the fact that this one woman had to do all of this every single day.
She's
all year
definitely wearing
long.
many hats.
Yeah.
That teacher at the one-room school.
Yeah.
For sure.
But like I said, the actual learning that was happening, very repetitive. It's just memorization. So, and you have to think also she had to plan something every day that 4 through 20-year-olds could all accomplish together. And she was like 22. So not easy to do. Okay, so moving on. That was like 1700s and 1800s. But in the 1830s in the U.S., we see a shift towards what are called common schools. And this is our friend Horace Mann, who will be a future episode someday.
Our friend Horace Mann.
But these schools would not be something all communities could have. And so many still continued to have to learn in one-room schoolhouses, even as other schools started popping up in larger cities.
Yeah, basically
Also-
a common school. Just a quick note. Common schools grew out of industrialization in this country and growth of
Right.
population centers. And so it's like, okay, what are we going to do with all these people now that we're... So it's a natural next step
Evolution of-
after one-room schoolhouses when we start to have way more kids to educate. What are we going to do? So, yeah, go ahead.
The other thing that should be noted about one-room schoolhouses and common schools and all of this is that these are just for white people. And so that's an important part of this history, is that when we talk about these educational opportunities, they are not for people of color. They are for middle class, mostly white people especially. Okay, so Horace Mann, 1838. He is a Whig politician known for his commitment to promoting public education. He is a secretary of the Massachusetts State Board of Education, and he was also elected to the U.S. House of Reps. Okay, so he founded and edited the Common School Journal, and so this was basically where he laid out all of his goals of the public schools and their issues so far. He traveled to Europe, especially to Prussia, to help inform his beliefs on what schools in the U.S.
I
should look
remember
like.
this. When was it? One of our other episodes, we were talking about Horace Mann going to Prussia.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a weird thing to consider that we're so influenced by that. But yeah, anyway.
And so his beliefs and practices weren't perfect. He used what was called the word method to teach reading, not phonics and the alphabet. And so even still, high levels of people were functionally illiterate because of this method of teaching, which is basically what he was all about.
Interesting.
Horace Mann basically set out this whole goal of what he thought all of these schools should have and what it should look like.
He did
and what
definitely
they should
lead
do.
the way in defining what school campuses and school buildings should look like and contain, and what kind of learning
And like what
should
the
go
day
on
should
there.
include, right?
Yeah.
Um,
You basically designed the blueprint for what we kind of think of as public education in America now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's evolved a great deal, obviously, but he's kind of the one who kicked it all off.
So in 1830, about 55% of children aged 5 to 14 were enrolled in public schools, and by 1870, that had risen to about 78%.
So you can see why we need bigger buildings.
Yeah. High school attendance did not become commonplace until the 20th century. In 1910, 14% of Americans aged 25 and older had completed high school. As recently as 1970, the high school completion rate was only 55%. But in 2017, 90% of Americans aged 25 and older had a high school degree. So we've seen a huge shift and push for this. Also because it's one of the things we are most heavily rated on in our score, you know what I mean, for the schools as far as their ratings go. One of our biggest goals is graduation rates.
Yeah.
So
Still a big focus.
So again, notice all of that still not focusing on what the education is like, but rather that there is one. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I kind of kept falling back into with this, was like with Horace Mann, like he had good ideas of what it should look like. But as we just keep learning over and over and over again, you know.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to jump to the next chunk of how things evolved in the American educational landscape. And that's kind of from like the 1870s to 1920s. So like you were just talking about, once we get Horace Mann and child labor laws and urban centers getting much bigger, we start to require bigger school buildings to meet all of this growing enrollment. In our country, early classroom designs from this area tend to feature sort of neoclassical facades, and that's what we were talking about. The schools that you and I went to, our elementary schools, were kind of this type. It's like this big, beautiful brick buildings with like stonework and fancy masonry and like all this kind of stuff.
Horrible to heat, horrible to cool, horrible to...
Difficult to maintain now, let's just say. But I mean, the problem is they're beautiful buildings. Like the elementary school that's right down the street from us is a beautiful building.
Oh,
Just
it's
big,
incredible.
Big brick buildings just from this era.
Beautiful big
meant to
windows.
stand the test of time.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that hurts me about them is that now people are all talking about tearing them down or renovating them or everything. It's just like, okay, but what you're gonna build in its place is gonna be
Not
but
pretty.
ugly,
Yeah.
right? It's gonna be. It's just school design, I think, currently is just ugly as sin. But we'll get there.
The high school they built.
Yeah.
That are like
I
the
think
newest
that-
building here is so ugly.
I think that schools are designed to look like prisons now. That's what I think. I think schools in this country look like prisons. They're like gated off, and there's very little natural light in a lot of them. They're just not pretty.
they can
I
keep
don't
the
think.
gates, but I'd like some light.
Yeah. Anyway, so back to the 1870s, 1920s. There's just like a focus on daylight and natural ventilation. It's kind of fundamental to a lot of the school plans that grew up in this period, because you have to have daylight because you don't have incandescent lighting in your buildings.
Right.
So you got to design it. You got to design your school building around when your students are going to be able to see.
With the one-room schoolhouse too, is like candles were too expensive.
Yeah.
Like they had to literally be there as soon as there was light. 'Cause
Yeah.
that was when you could learn.
That's the other thing about one-room schoolhouses. There are typically big windows up and down the sides of them.
So they get sun on both sides.
Yep. So natural lighting, natural ventilation, very important to a lot of these plans.
And me too.
In the later builds during this era, you start to get incandescent lighting, and you start to get some like kind of basically mechanical ventilation systems, but not some. I mean, that was later on. So then we kind of group to the progressive and Depression era schools. That's 1920s to 1940s.
It being called a Depression era is so true for what some of them look like too.
They are depressing. No, that's not. Yeah. Anyway, so in the beginning in the 1920s, architects started to get involved. Like architects who were trying to make a name for themselves, sort of. So that there's like Walter Gropius and Richard Neutra. I don't know these names actually. I remember Walter Gropius from like art learning in high school, but basically there's sudden interest kind of in architects tackling school problems instead of just like this functional thing. People are starting to think about it as a way for architects and make a name for themselves. So there's this kind of open air school movement that's continuing from what we were talking about before. Schools from this time period are characterized by emphasis on fresh air, daylight, outdoor learning, and an easy flow through structures that would contribute to students' physical health and mental well-being. So this is in the U.S. anyway. This is when ventilation standards start to be really important. We start to care about that kind of stuff, especially because these are developing in urban centers.
This whole thing, this evolution, right, to start thinking like, hey, maybe we should care about what the rooms and things are like.
Maybe we should care about what people are breathing. Yeah.
Well, that and like also like, oh, they need light and they need
Yeah.
You know, I know you've shared this with me, but what was it during World War One when they looked at where the bullets had hit?
Oh, the airplanes. Yeah.
And they only focused on where they had been hit, right?
Yeah, they forgot about the planes that all didn't come back.
So, but that's what this feels like to me.
Yeah.
It's like, are we addressing a whole problem or are we forgetting that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It feels like kind of I don't know if that's a great connection there, but it feels like maybe we're not placing
Sticking
our
band-aids on architecture.
Like
yeah.
it felt, yeah. Anyways.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit of a stretch.
No,
but that's what it
you're-
reminds me in
you're
my
right.
head because I'm like, are we really dealing with the problem at hand? Or
I think we're slapping a band-aid on it.
exactly.
This would probably mean something to someone, but it's kind of abstract to me. But the ventilation standards at this time were set at 30 cubic feet per minute per student of, I don't know, ventilation of
sounds
air.
important.
I'm not really sure what that translates to, but there you have it. And then in the 1930s, the intervention of the Public Works Administration in the U.S., this is the PWA, allowed school construction to continue despite our financial disaster. And then so many features of earlier schools were retained, but probably simplified. Stuff starts to get a little simpler, less ornate, not as pretty, frankly.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and then by the late 1930s, fluorescent lights had begun to appear in some schools, and this is
Cue-
what makes school feel so gross to me.
Cue why I had to ask your mom for a happy light this
A happy
year.
light, yeah.
Because it creates a fake
An artificial sun inside your room,
that you can face towards you, so it feels like sun.
and
but
you called
it's
it your
not.
happy light.
It's my happy light. And my kids ask for my happy light now. So we all need happy lights.
Fluorescent lighting in school buildings feels so gross to me. Like, I feel like a zombie when I'm sitting under fluorescent lights for too long. It's just a nasty. I'd rather have very dim, like, incandescent lighting than fluorescent.
There's a reason why I open up all my windows and I close all my lights as
Yeah.
often as I can.
Yeah.
Turn off my lights because we would rather sit like that.
Yes. They're gross. They just feel gross. I don't like them at all. Okay, so post-war schools, 1940s.
But again, one more thing in the classroom that doesn't help
Yeah.
the learning environment.
Yes, for
Even
sure.
though on the school side they're like, oh, these save money, whatever.
Yeah, I kind of have this
Sorry,
conversation.
I'm getting angry thinking about it.
No, it's okay.
But that's one of those things. I'm like, this lighting is horrible. No wonder we all have headaches.
I've had this conversation a lot with my dad because we've been talking about businesses and physical office spaces in relation to the pandemic. So I'm like, I keep telling him, I've been freelance for a long time, so I get to work from home, but I'm telling him, like, I never want to go back to an office. I don't want to be in an office building because office buildings are gross.
Yeah.
And I do my best work when I can just be physically comfortable.
yeah.
And the same applies to school learning. You know, you just do better work when you are in a physical environment that is more suited to the task of concentration. And it's just, anyway, it's your physical space can really impact the degree to which you can concentrate and, you know, absorb information and all kinds of stuff. So,
Yep.
Anyway, okay, post-war schools, 1940s and 50s. These are the school buildings that I think about when I think about the ugliest buildings that exist. They are often the pictures that I found. We have a kind of cool article that most of this USA stuff came from. It's about school design, but the picture for this was just like a long, flat, very few windows, very closed off, basically just a long flat brick box is the way I can describe it. And they're like, ugh, they're so ugly. But there's one right down the road from us here. The middle school that I went to was designed this way. It's just like, this era of school design is to me so gross. So anyway, post-war schools featured more standardized and cost-conscious designs. And that's because of tight budgets among the baby boom spike and school enrollments. So
Go figure.
one style it became popular.
Hey, you know what we should do?
Yeah.
We maybe
Maybe?
stop
maybe stop defunding
that thing.
education.
That thing we keep saying.
That thing? Maybe we
that
should.
would have made our schools better.
There was this design that became popular in California and other kind of relatively warm climate areas. It was called a finger plan design, which followed the era's more modern one-story flat roof design aesthetic. So you get these finger-like corridors, and this is what I remember my middle school feeling like. You get these kind of just like weird long stretches of hallway that all kind of connect to like a central area, which is usually a cafeteria in our case. So everybody's walking through the cafeteria all the time to go down these finger-like hallways.
Yeah, that's true.
So air conditioning also starts to happen during this time. Yeah.
You don't say.
Air conditioning. So ventilation standards get lowered from 30 to 10 cubic feet per minute per student. And then although artificial lights proliferated, most schools still provided plenty of natural light. Yeah, the windows were so ugly and they never opened because they're all broken now.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about this middle school that I went to that fit this design aesthetic.
Yours does. The problem with, I keep thinking about my elementary. I love that building so much. It was probably
I loved my elementary school too.
I'm sure it was just as
That's the
big of a pain in the butt as yours because those are about the same age.
That's the Queen Anne style kind of thing.
But it had, every room had huge windows. It was so great. And then the middle school had literally no windows.
Yeah,
it was like
the
3 windows in a
post-war
classroom.
one that I'm thinking of is they're like slits basically of
Yes.
natural light. Like,
Yes.
They're just not well designed to allow you to feel the sun. So then we jump ahead to an era of what are called experimental schools. So this is when we actually see dwindling enrollments for a while and tightening of budgets in many school districts.
Enrollments. Okay, so we're talking what, post Vietnam
During and post and
into Korea,
60s and
I'm
70s.
sorry, post Korea into Vietnam.
60s and 70s.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So
Those heckin' baby boomers, man.
heckin' boomers. So this is a time period in which there's a lot of economizing and reconfiguring existing spaces. So this is when we start to kind of try to repurpose spaces that maybe aren't best designed to be repurposed. Let's just say. And then there's also a greater emphasis on prefabrication techniques in school construction. So we have to. Yeah, we kind of start to
So
de-emphasize big windows and natural ventilation because we are getting all this newfangled building technology and it makes things even uglier and more depressing. So there's an energy crisis in 73. I don't know anything about that. You, with your American history, might. I would assume something to do with...
Yeah, let me... In
I don't know.
1973, a rat ate through the one cord.
The one cord that the United States is plugged into.
I mean,
Okay.
you act like
I'm
it's
sure
not
there
what
was-
happened to Texas last year.
Okay. Yeah. I'll go look up what the energy crisis of 1973 was for next episode, and that will be what I learned. The energy crisis of 1973, not a thing that I know about. Anyway,
No, I can't
okay,
say I
so
know either.
some schools replaced all of their large windows and natural ventilation with fluorescent lights and mechanical ventilation systems. Gross!
Because we didn't need the windows. So we were just like, well.
Some schools, in fact, took on the appearance of shopping malls, air-conditioned spaces with few or no windows at all. Yes, they sure did. And I hate those schools. Okay. The age of experimentation also led to open plan or open space classrooms.
This is one of the worst things that ever happened in education.
Open space classrooms.
Yes.
Yeah, the middle school that I went to was big on the open space classroom, and they had these tracks with these fold out like accordion
Horrible.
dividing walls, but otherwise it was just a big giant room. So
It was
there'd be,
so
like,
loud.
Yeah, it's very loud. There are very few windows.
There's
It's very
no
dim
definition
and
of your
dark.
space.
No, you just. I mean, there's a big pushback against open floor office planning too for the same reason.
Yeah.
They're just gross,
Distracting.
To exist in. They're gross and distracting, and there's no light.
The
and
intermediate school I went to had a few of these rooms still. And they just had, like you said, these floor to ceiling, these big gray walls they would roll out. And it was always so loud in those classrooms. And like, I'm sure the whole
because
thing.
it's basically trying to do class in like a gymnasium is essentially what it is.
Yeah, but you're gonna share the room.
Yeah.
And you're gonna be on each side of like a felt wall essentially. And then
I just remember the big panels that they had to try to move. Like these teachers would come out and try to move these big giant sliding panels that would supposedly divide the classroom and provide you with a little bit of privacy or something, whatever it was. But
I would have hated to teach in that. I think about that all the time. I'm so thankful
they're pretty nasty.
that my school is literally so old. It was before this.
I don't even know why. See, this is the thing. So there'd be like 3 classrooms in a row that would have these dividing walls in between them. So it'd be like maybe 3 or 4 classrooms, And they have like, 30 kids in each of these classrooms. So as you can imagine, it's this big, giant
Yeah.
hallway full of classrooms that don't have any physical walls between them. So, yeah. Anyway.
Some of these that we had in our school, you had to walk through the one room to get to the other.
Yes, that would happen
So,
too.
like, on top of that, if you were coming back from, like, gym
You're gross.
and all your buddies in the other class were taking their history test, you're like,
Yeah, if you have a blocked class, so like if you're going back to back for 2 periods in a class and there's a classroom on the other side of you, that definitely happened to me in middle school all the time. You have to walk through the one classroom to get to the other.
so
It's
horrible.
just not great. It's not great.
Oh, God.
I'm not sure why we ever thought that was
Oh,
a
God.
worthwhile architectural experiment. Anyway,
I'm mad just thinking about it.
we also got the U.S. Department of Defense proposing underground classrooms that could double as fallout shelters during this time. So that's fun.
Okay, well, time to keep moving on. Here
yeah.
we go.
So
You're going to say that word.
I'm gonna skip this.
Babaloogie. Babalogie.
Bobiology. Bobiology.
Balbiology.
It's called building biology, and there's like a
No,
weird...
it's called balbiology.
Baubiologie. Like, I know what the roots in those words combine to mean, but I
Try
don't
it
know how to
again.
say it. Bobiology.
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 Bobiology. Anyway,
If I was an Oscar Mayer wing.
the Baubiology movement.
My baloney has a first name.
It's Baubiologie. Okay, this is called building biology schools.
You tried to skip this section.
I just want to
I'm
skip it
not
because I
letting
didn't
you.
want to say the word. This is
I know, I called you out.
1970s to present, and I'd never heard of this.
I haven't either.
This movement that we can't pronounce began in Europe. Somebody please call in and tell
Please
us how
don't.
to just
Please don't.
send us a voicemail
don't
and
want
let us know how to say this. So this movement began in Europe in response to post-World War II.
Sorry.
Post-World War II rise in illness attributed to faulty construction practices.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
And
happens.
faulty name.
Places an
practice.
emphasis on buildings that are both healthy and environmentally friendly. And this kind of has continued into the modern era of school construction. But yeah, it's basically like natural materials
Yeah.
in the construction, daylit
get into
rooms,
that.
central courtyards.
I can get
again.
into that too.
Yeah. So then we were kind of like in the schools in decline era, which is exactly when you and I started going to school.
That worked out
This
well.
1980s and 1990s.
Well, you know what happens when they stop paddling kids?
Oh gosh,
The world
don't
just
get me
fell
started
apart.
when you stop paddling kids. So there's this backlash to experimentation that
Rightfully
had
so.
been happening because it was all terrible. Basically, the 80s and 90s are defined by very modest investment in school
Yeah.
construction.
It's showing.
In 1981, U.S. ventilation standards within buildings dropped to a low point of 5 cubic feet per minute per person, which is disgusting. That's like sitting on an airplane and being in school, basically.
Except for airplanes are better cared for.
Yeah. So 8 years later, though, the
They have
standards
higher standards.
yeah. 8 years later, the standards rebounded to 15 cubic feet per
God.
minute per person. So, yeah. Okay. So, by the mid 90s, U.S. officials had begun to note the state of disrepair affecting the nation's schools.
Dear Lord.
No kidding. We still have this state
Who
of
is this,
disrepair.
Bill? Is this Bill's fault?
Probably.
Is that crime bill coming back?
Bush and Bill, George W. Probably.
And HW. Well, not quite.
HW is, yeah, before this, probably HW. I mean, really, this is like, we actually have as a topic Reagan era cuts to education spending as a whole thing to cover, but like this is a direct result of that. So,
Yeah. This is when you start seeing those
Portable
trailers
classrooms. Yeah.
start popping
Portable
up. And we had a
classrooms.
few of these.
Portable classroom is like a very grandiose name for what is essentially a trailer with desks.
It's
in
a
it.
trailer that they plop near another door,
Yep.
and you had to run through the rain.
Yep. And they're supposed to be temporary solutions, but schools started to use them as permanent solutions. Not great, boss. So now we've got this green schools kind of movement. So it's like starting in the 2000s, we get if you've heard of LEED, it's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design ratings. There's this thing called the U.S. Green Building Council in the late 90s, and the LEED program for schools started in 2007. And this all spurred an emphasis on environmentally friendly buildings that also improved indoor air quality because 5 cubic whatever meters, is it that it? 5 cubic feet. 5 cubic feet per minute per person is just not enough air circulating through our lungs. So yeah, we get these LEED schools that are focused on indoor air quality we start to worry about what's going into the paint and finishes in these schools because those things are highly toxic sometimes. So anyways, just like
I just can't believe it took that long.
I mean,
how
like
long
I said,
have we
I
known
think
that cigarettes are bad? You know, like you
it's
just
that
like
kind of thing.
right.
Oh yeah, when my dad went to school at the high school where you teach and where I attended, the guys used to just sit there in their classrooms and smoke while they were teaching.
I
So,
mean, and I'm not making the comparison, like, but it just feels like, well, of course it's bad.
Yeah.
Like, if,
Yeah.
what do you mean you
Yeah.
don't understand that the kids lick tables that are covered in, you know
Kids
what I mean?
lick everything. Kids will just
Like,
lick it.
the
Put
only
it in
time
front of it, a kid will
like,
lick
this
it.
is the first year in 8 years I haven't had someone to tell someone not to lick something. It's just because they were stuck behind a mask the whole time. You know?
Uh-huh.
Like, what are we doing? Fine.
Okay. So, yeah.
You know, summer doesn't make me immune to being angry, I guess, is the key.
I've riled you up.
Yeah.
Why don't you bring us back down to
So,
to talk about the ideal kind of school
this is
design.
kind of fun, actually. I have
Imagining the
opinions on
perfect
this,
school.
yeah.
I think one of the first papers that I had to do in grad school was imagining the perfect school.
That is so cool.
experience. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I need that job.
I basically was like, the Lyceum, build it,
Oh.
ready, go.
You were like,
I
put a
was
big
like,
tree.
make school like ancient Athens. Okay, go.
Great. Submit. Turnitin.com. Go.
A+.
Okay, so what does a perfect school building look like? If we know that one-room schoolhouses are not ideal, right? And after the shift of people like Horace Mann to create what we kind of use, and I would say that even what Horace Mann did is still obvious, right? In our like public schools, like we haven't lost that idea.
Yeah, you basically go to any city in America and there's going to be at least one school named after Horace Mann.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would it look like now? And so one of the things I mentioned here was like that we've transitioned from having to worry about like Cold War practices of like sheltering in place.
fallout
like,
shelters.
Yeah. And
Air raid
so
drills.
And so now instead we have to think about things like active shooter drills, and we don't have to worry about overhead projectors and TVs on rolling carts, but we have a lot more, like that shift alone changes the physical space.
Technology has definitely evolved the way that classroom spaces are developed.
Right.
Because instead of having to cover every single wall with a chalkboard, now you just have this smart screen thing that is hooked up to your computer, and you can put whatever you want on it whenever, and you can recall old notes, and even just stuff like that. Small things like being able to pull up whatever some kids wrote on the board yesterday on your means you don't have to keep walls covered in chalkboards, because you can just have it there digitally whenever you need.
So even with all these shifts, though, unfortunately, nearly 50% of schools in the U.S. Date back to between the 50s and 60s.
The gross period. The grossest flat gross buildings period.
And I included here that you and I both know and even attended schools that were built in the 1910s and 20s.
Yeah.
And my elementary school is still in use, but not by the school district I grew up in. They sold it and still used as a school, but the other schools in our area are still that age. And the elementary school you went to is that age. It was a former high school that turned into an elementary school, and it's still in use today. So you and I grew up in these types of buildings. So when we die of some very weird paint poisoning, we will know why. Okay. Anyways, so it used to be like what I talked about earlier as well, is that districts would have multiple buildings by grade levels and groups. But now it's more and more common across the United States, if there are levies to be passed, that schools start building like K through 6 and 7 through 12 buildings. You're going to see, I think, over time, fewer and fewer school buildings and more just like campuses where you might have actually one ginormous school. For example, I know of one in the Dayton area, and they have the central area of that school is the school board office, and then there's like a wing off of each side, and one's K through 6 and the other 7 through 12.
Interesting. So we're centralizing.
Yeah,
school
so I
systems
think, and that's still happening now. Like even when I talk, in schools I've been in or schools that I work in now or know people that work, whenever they talk about levies, it's always to build a school that's like K5 or K6 or something like that. Yeah. So there is going to be the loss of like what you and I grew up with, which was like, I mean, you and I went through, I think, probably 3 schools by the time we graduated. And I think over time we're going to see that some students may never have to switch a school.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. You'll just switch which area you're
bigger
in.
and bigger and bigger. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest pushes that we'll see in education is that they want it all to be centrally located. Whereas you and I grew up in districts where we had elementaries on each side of the district. So I spent a lot of time. This was actually, like I said, a lot of fun. I looked over a bunch of different blueprints and design ideas for schools. And it was a lot of elementary schools I looked at, but also K-12 and just 9-12 buildings. But they all, regardless of the age of the students that were going to be attending there, they all had some commonalities. Just some of the things I saw. They were all activity oriented, so they might keep the extracurriculars or the specialist classes close to each other. And it was so that they could all share what they need to, maybe technology or just space or things like that. So art studios and things like that would be close to like photography or even like that kind of stuff. So they would all have those types of wings like almost completely dedicated to them. They all had a need for a ton of open space. And I don't mean like big hollow open space that isn't ever usable, but like space that can be divided and used in ways that allow for like group learning or smaller
Community space.
classes. Yeah, like it's not going to be some really, really loud open space that you can't hear if 3 teachers are all using it, but
With
it's going
the
to
foldy
allow.
walls.
Yeah. All of these classrooms are larger and they have a lot of room to go to work and manipulate the seating arrangement. They might even be mixed or like separated into smaller sections of a classroom. Like some of the blueprints would have like an area that was like cluster desks so they could all work together, and then individual seating, and then like a more maybe like comfortable area like for reading, that kind of thing.
I kind of think of kindergarten classrooms when I think of this.
Yeah, me too.
My kindergarten classroom, so it was in one of these old school buildings, but there were areas where there was like a book reading corner with like carpets and pillows and stuff, and then like there was a place where everybody's desks were all aligned, and there was like a computer area. So it was kind of a big classroom that was broken up into different sections.
And
like
basically that's what they're saying. In my classroom today, I would love that. I wish I had that kind of space.
your classroom is so small though.
I would love it so much to be able to have like send kids to different parts, whatever. So all of these schools had built-in hubs, either reading areas, places for groups to work, places where multiple classes could combine to work together. So it was all about flexibility. Some of them would have like a little group of like, it was like one door you walked into and it had like 4 little pods off of it. And like the blueprint I looked at, they each had like a smart board. So like you could go work on a presentation, you could go, like that kind of thing. My last note was that most of these things are exactly what a school built between the 20s and 50s don't have the ability to provide for teachers and students.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but it was so
Flexibility is
much
not a
fun
big thing
to
in these
look through
buildings.
some of these.
Yeah.
Like to dream about a school or like a classroom that could work like that. Like I think about all of the things I would love to do.
Yeah.
And it makes me very upset.
I just don't want, even these schools that are doing innovative things on the inside still look like prisons from the outside to me. They really do. So it's just like big brick, like huge brick walls. And I think that the size of them just contributes to this feeling though. They're just like enormous big brick walls and often still not a lot of natural light in them, unfortunately. But yeah, it's good to know that we are trying to re-emphasize things like air quality and sort of open to natural light and stuff like that.
Yeah, the other thing about all these blueprints, and this is obviously very dependent on where your school district is located and what kind of land you have, but all of the examples I looked at were only 1 floors. So it seems like that might be the
I think
sweet
that
spot
accessibility has a lot to do with that.
No, I agree, but I
Yeah.
also mean, in cities, you can't expect to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Just with every school. So
Yeah.
for some of our more rural areas, that is a possibility. But
Yeah,
it was interesting to look through like lists and lists of PDFs of blueprints, and all of these dream schools were 1 floor.
That's really interesting. I mean, yeah, like you're talking about, and like I was just saying how they look like prisons. You need a lot of land to build campuses
Yeah,
like
it's
this.
huge.
And
Acres and acres.
yeah, huge. They're enormous. I can't emphasize enough how big some of these school campuses are getting. But yeah, that's kind of interesting. I am curious why they go out instead of up.
Yeah.
It contributes to, I don't know.
I
I'm
mean,
not
thinking
sure why
from
that
a
is.
safety perspective, it makes a lot of sense to me. A fire, active shooter, things like that. Like something that we have to always plan for. And both of these cases are congested stairways. You know what I mean? So if you eliminate that and you have, and now that does like the thing which makes it more sprawling and awkward sometimes, I think, but it also helps to, you know what I mean? Like in safety features. The one thing that, the other last thing I'll mention, sorry, is that 1 floor plan does make it safer, I think. And I'll give an example. The high school that I graduated from was built, I think I was probably in the first 10 years of the new high school, maybe 15 years of it. But the downstairs, actually both of the floors where all of the classrooms were, it was on a curve.
Oh,
so
yeah. I
it made
remember you
like
talking about
when you
this.
look at the front of the building, it's got this nice big beautiful curve and it looks cool and there are these pillars and stuff. When you're in it though, you can't see all the way down.
Because the hallways are curved.
You're always blind. And that I never thought about how stupid that was. And then I was like, well, we built this post Columbine, but we just didn't like, like it still wasn't a factor, I guess. But like today, obviously that's not the case at all. So I think
It's really
that's
depressing to me that we live in an era where we have to design, like we have to have architecture that considers what to do in the event of a mass shooting. Like it's just insane.
I think single floors are still probably the safest option for a million reasons.
Yeah.
Like I said, even just tornadoes and fires alone, know. But still.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any dreams, if you could create your own school?
No, like I said, I don't like that the buildings always look like prisons. I don't know why, if that's just like, it seems to just be a trend. You go to a new, like, especially one of these big combined campus type schools, they're just giant patches of land there's a huge, big, wide, flat brick structure on it. And they're just not very appealing. And I mean, they're getting better to be inside of, it's getting better. There are more accommodations being made to make it better, for more conducive to learning, but they still, I just think, I don't know. I just think, like I said earlier, that prioritizing comfort is not necessarily something school architects are thinking about, but kids learn best when they are comfortable. I mean, humans in general do their best work when they are comfortable. That's just the way we work. So I don't know. I don't really have kind of like the ideal, but I think just having spaces that are open to the idea of collaboration and like, subject matters not being so divided, stuff like that, where we think of things more holistically, I think is kind of the ideal. And then just like I said, having lots of natural light and space to move around, and being careful with how we do like heating and cooling, because you can't be comfortable if you're freezing or sweating. Just all this kind of stuff is we should keep in mind.
I agree. It would be very hard to do. Thinking about all those things, it'd be very complicated. It'd take a lot of runs probably before you got it. All right, want to do last episode's question?
Sure.
You want me to read it, or would you like to?
Please go ahead. Why don't you?
Okay. So last episode's question, it was from May 27th, said this: on this day, May 27th in 1937, the Golden Gate Bridge connecting San Francisco and Marin County, California, opened to pedestrian traffic. The following day, it opened to vehicular traffic. So on that opening day, how many people walked across that famous bridge?
How many people?
200,000.
200,000 people.
In one day.
That's a lot.
And it's a big bridge, but it's not that big.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot of traffic.
It's kind of interesting.
It's kind of cool.
So beautiful.
Yeah, it is
one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Iconic.
Like, rounding that corner, that is so cool.
It is cool.
All right.
Okay.
This episode's question.
Sure. Horace Mann was the first president of what college in Ohio? The college has been politically liberal and reformist from the beginning. It was the third college in the country to admit African American students on an equal basis with whites, and at the time this was a highly controversial, even dangerous move. What was the name of that college where Horace Mann was the first president?
And still in operating order today.
Huh? Barely, but yes.
Don't give it away. You're gonna make it too obvious.
Okay, I won't say anymore.
I'm just kidding.
All right.
Well,
what did you learn this week?
What did we learn this week? I just Googled some stuff. I was going to talk about It Takes Two, but we already talked about it.
We did. Oh, I'm sorry. I stole your thunder.
That's okay. I went to the dentist yesterday and I didn't learn it there, but it just fits. So the name of the blob of toothpaste on your toothbrush.
Oh.
What's it called?
What is it called?
A nurdle.
Nurdle?
Nurdle.
A nurdle. I didn't know that we needed a name for the blob.
I definitely learned more than that, but I couldn't think of it off the top of my head.
It's the first week of summer. You're a teacher on your summer break. You don't have to learn.
The other thing I just want to talk about really quickly. We have read so many books already. And the Hank Green books are so good.
Yeah.
Just absolutely incredible pieces.
We've been really enjoying those. They're kind of like sci-fi.
Oh, it's so much fun. It was a perfect beach read. It was just truly like, we have really found, a good way to make ourselves very pleased with what we're doing with our time. And that's fun games and good books. So
lots of reading.
If you're looking for a book, Hank Green. If you're looking for the name of the blob of toothpaste on your toothbrush, it's a nurdle. And we just finished book 6 of Harry Potter and did
yeah.
the movie, and we're gonna
Our
visit-
reread.
Yeah,
We're doing this thing where we're rereading the books that kind of defined our youth, and it's very interesting to discover how bad some of the things are that we thought were completely awesome at the time.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
I'm going through it right now with Dumbledore, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Anyways, so if you have the time, and you should take the time, just try to find something that's kind of, like we found some good escapes, and I'm thankful for those.
Yeah.
So, what about you? What'd you learn?
Oh, I learned
This
for
is
some
so
reason,
weird.
I think it's because we were traveling. So we went to North Carolina, so we had to travel through some different parts of the country, and we were talking about the Sun Belt and the Rust Belt and whatever. And then for some reason I found an article that was all about the belts, the many different belts worn by America, the country. So I went through the article and found a bunch of familiar belts, but then I found
Familiar belts.
an unfamiliar belt, and that was the Jello
Because we
belt.
thought we were in the Rust Belt, and we weren't.
We were not in the Rust Belt.
We were in the Sun Belt.
We were. But this one was called the Jello belt. The Jello belt.
I hate it so much.
I was like, what the heck is the Jello belt? And it's mostly just Utah. Utah is the Jello belt. And apparently, according to this article, and I don't know why this is, people in the Mormon faith really like Jello. They consume per capita way more Jello. Like Salt Lake City in particular consumes so much Jello. I don't know why this is.
I
If
just don't like
somebody
Jello that much.
in the LDS church wants to talk to us, write in, please tell us why y'all like Jello that much. But yeah, there's a Jello belt, and it has a lot to do with where big concentrations of people in the Mormon church live. So there we go. I learned about the Jello belt. I also learned something that enraged me, and that's that Nike, that company that makes shoes and athletic apparel in general, doesn't know how to freaking transliterate its own name. They released these shoes that are supposed to have it's supposed to honor the Greek goddess from which the Nike name is derived, Nike. Yeah, okay. So they put Greek letters on the back of these shoes embroidered in gold, and it's all fancy looking and stuff, but they put the wrong Greek letters. Because supposedly they look more like English letters of Nike than so what they actually put would, if you were gonna say it, it would say Peaks. Just go look it up. I'm so like, you're named Nike, like you can't get it right. So yeah, Nike. Product design
Nike
team.
wasn't their first name, so they just settled on Nike because they had to have something.
Well, good for them, but they need to
I
be more
think
careful
your
there.
standards of Nike are pretty high.
Okay, but Nike is a huge, like, branding and Nike go hand in hand. Like,
Do you know how many people are going to be like, oh, you know what? I'm not going to buy these shoes now because
Well,
it's
it was
not
kind of
true.
funny because my circle of Twitter friends were all like big
Your
nerds.
circle of Twitter friends are not sneakerheads, so they don't care.
No, they learned Greek in college.
Yeah, and that if that
therefore-
was there would be no overlap between people who did that in college and people who are sneakerheads. Okay, if you want to create a Venn diagram, those circles will never touch.
they don't intersect at all. Well, anyway, that's what
I
I learned.
appreciate your desire for accuracy. I
Attic
do.
Greek Accuracy Society.
I'm sad to tell you that Nike, quite frankly, doesn't give a and they don't have to, because you know what? Those shoes are gonna sell,
Peaks.
and then we can all go wear them in Athens, and
And get made fun of for shoes that say Peaks.
yeah, I'm sure they'll make fun of us for reading the very fine print on the back of our shoes. Hey, Nike, if you're listening, I know someone here who's pretty fluent enough in Greek to know that you've really muffed this one up. So why don't you give us a call and send me a pair of those 9.5 in mints? Okay.
Okay.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Oh, 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.
See you at the next episode with my
Bye.
new sneakers.
See ya. Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1.
We're trying to grow our audience, so please check us out at 16to1.com, all spelled out, and tell your friends about the show.
On our website, you can find links to follow us on social media, an archive of all our old episodes, and a contact form where you can get in touch.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. Time for my daily walnut snack.